Have you ever wondered why pill bottles have the little seal under the cover? It can be irritating to peel off, but it does seem like a good idea to have something to show if someone messes with the contents. It stems from a series of murders that took place in 1982. Throughout the Chicago area, someone was lacing over-the-counter pain relievers with cyanide. When ingested, the chemical causes nausea, headaches, and difficulty breathing before seizures and death from cardiac arrest. Imagine the terror that must have gone through the people of Chicago and beyond when nothing that they bought in the supermarket could be trusted. Despite a thorough investigation in 1982 and a renewed investigation in 2009, a culprit has never been brought to justice. The Tylenol Murders. The people of Chicago started the 1980s filled with hope. In 1979, the city had elected its first female mayor, Jane Byrne, with the largest margin of victory in the Windy City before and since. She entered office with a promise to revitalize Chicago and lift it from the decline that it had suffered in the prior decades. Murders were down that year from a high of 970 in 1974. To put into perspective just how much crime had increased in the previous decades, in 1965, there had been only 395 killings in the city. The gang problem had been growing since the end of World War II, with dense housing projects providing a fertile recruitment ground. But the 1970s saw it reach new levels. Police even refused to get out of their cars in some neighborhoods after dark. These criminal organizations were funded by the lucrative drug trade in the city. But in 1982, a different sort of murder occurred in Chicago that would make headlines internationally and send everyday Americans into a panic. The dream of a brighter future dissolved in fear and distrust. 7 people would lose their lives to a random act of cruelty and murder. The first victim was a 12-year-old girl named Mary Kellerman. Born on March 9, 1970, the only child participated in gymnastics, played guitar, enjoyed cooking, and she had just started babysitting to earn some extra money. Her friends and teachers remember her as an engaging and loving child. Mary's mother, Gianna Kellerman, picked up a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol on September 28, 1982, on a shopping trip at the Jewel grocery store on the corner of Arlington Heights and Beesterfield Road in Elk Grove Village. The following day, Mary took one of the capsules around 6:15 a.m. after complaining of a sore throat and runny nose. 45 minutes later, her parents found her collapsed on the bathroom floor. She was rushed to the Alexian Brothers Medical Center, where shortly before 10 a.m., she was pronounced dead. Initially, doctors thought she may have died of a stroke, but there were signs of something more intentional. And these suspicions were confirmed when the bottle of Tylenol was examined as one of the last things that Mary had consumed. The tablets were found to contain 65 milligrams of cyanide, several times more than the lethal dose. The poison had also been found in Mary's bloodstream, and the question on everyone's mind was who had tampered with the Tylenol. Cyanide is a deadly toxin that is found in many foods, though in small amounts, such as lima beans, almonds, apple seeds, and apricot pits. It is said to smell like bitter almonds. The substance is used in various manufacturing processes, and in its gas form is used by exterminators to kill vermin. Cyanide works by inhibiting your body's cells from using oxygen to form energy. When this occurs, the cells use the last bits of energy before they die off. This is why victims of cyanide poisoning typically pass away due to cardiac arrest, as their heart is unable to function. It is said to be extremely painful until the victim loses consciousness as their brain exhausts its oxygen supply. Whoever the culprit was, they were a disgusting monster. The next to fall victim to the poisoner was a man named Adam Janus. The 27-year-old was born in Poland on March 7, 1955, and moved to the U.S. with his family when he was 8. In 1982, he was married with 2 children living in Arlington Heights. Adam worked as a supervisor at the post office, and those who knew him say he was always happy. In the late morning of September 29th, he purchased a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol at the Jewel store on Vale Avenue. By 2:30, he was showing signs of medical distress and was rushed to the Northwest Community Hospital in Arlington Heights. Less than an hour later, at 3:15 p.m., he was pronounced dead, leaving behind his wife and children. The Janus family suffered the worst of the poisoning, as Adam was not the only member of the family to take the tainted tablets at Adam's house. Stanley Janus was 25 and his wife Teresa was only 20 years old in 1982. The two had just gotten married in June of that year. Not realizing the cause of Adam's sudden illness, around 5:40 p.m. on September 29th, Stanley and Teresa took some of the poisoned Tylenol. Less than an hour later, they were both in the Northwest Community Hospital. At 8:15, Stanley was pronounced dead, while Teresa held on until the early afternoon of October 1st. The killer did not limit his evil to Arlington Heights. 27-year-old Mary Lynn Reiner was born on April 15, 1955 in Villa Park. At the time of her death, Mary Lynn and her husband had 4 children, the youngest of which was born just a week before she lost her life. She was known as a devoted mother and excellent cook. Around 3 p.m. on September 29th, Reiner bought a bottle of Tylenol extra-strength capsules at Frank's Finer Foods in Winfield. A half hour later, she took one of the pills and became comatose. By 5, she was on life support at the Central DuPage Hospital, and the next morning she was taken off life support and pronounced dead. The horrors of September 29th were not over yet. 31-year-old Mary McFarland was a single mother with 2 sons, ages 4 and 2. Sources say that Mary's children were her life, and she often took them to the park and zoo. Around 6:30 p.m., Mary complained of feeling dizzy after taking a Tylenol at her job at the Illinois Bell Telephone Company. Just minutes later, she had collapsed and an ambulance was called. By 7:30, she was at the Good Samaritan Hospital in Downers Grove, but by 3:18 the next morning, Mary was pronounced dead. The 7th and final known victim to lose their life to the poisoner was a 35-year-old woman named Paula Prince. Paula was born on November 26, 1946, the youngest of 4 children. She worked as a flight attendant for United Airlines, but had recently started a party planning business. She was known to love traveling and looked forward to starting a family. At 9:16 p.m. on September 29th, Paula bought a 24-pack of extra-strength Tylenol at a Walgreens on Wells Street in Chicago. When she got home, she took one of the tablets alone in her apartment. Her body was not discovered until the late afternoon of October 1st. Due to multiple fatalities in the same house, Arlington Heights had dispatched a nurse named Helen Jensen to the Janus home to investigate. Inside, she found the bottle of Tylenol along with a receipt showing that it had been purchased earlier in the day that the Januses fell ill. When it got to the investigators, the medical examiner already had suspicions that Adam, Stanley, and Teresa had been poisoned with cyanide. He advised police to see if the bottle smelled like almonds, and they confirmed that it did. When tested, the tablets showed that they contained several times the lethal amount of the poison. Fear had swept the area as news of the sudden deaths spread. The only common thread was the Tylenol. The public was advised to stop using the pain reliever until they could determine what was going on. Johnson & Johnson, who manufactured the pills, issued a massive recall. The tainted product was determined to have been placed in at least 6 stores. One bottle had been purchased by a woman named Linda Morgan, but due to a strange smell, thankfully, she did not take any of the tablets. Other cases popped up across the country as others imitated the evil act that they saw filling up their headlines. The recall from Johnson & Johnson was expanded, resulting in the loss of more than $250 million in today's money. The batches that the tainted bottles had come from were manufactured in both Pennsylvania and Texas, leading to the conclusion that the poison had been added after they had been distributed. When no leads bore fruit, FBI profiler John Douglas proposed a trap for the killer. Douglas had pioneered criminal profiling and was loosely portrayed in the Netflix show Mindhunter in the character Holden Ford. The plan was to release the home address and gravesite of Mary Kellerman. Douglas believed that the killer might feel the need to revisit his victims, and the locations were kept under constant surveillance. But nothing came of these efforts. The only real clue that investigators had was a bit of security footage from the Walgreens that showed Paula Prince buying the tainted pills. Looming behind her is a bearded man who seems to be watching her pick up the bottle, and some suspect that this was the poisoner. Due to the fact that the fatalities all occurred on the same day, it is likely that the monster distributed the poisoned bottles on the 28th and 29th of September, so it is plausible that the bearded man was the culprit. In the early days of the investigation, Johnson & Johnson reported receiving a letter demanding $1 million to stop the poisonings. It was traced back to a man named James William Lewis. The 36-year-old admitted to writing the letter but denied any other involvement. He was subsequently convicted of extortion and sentenced to 10 years in prison, but it could not be proven that he was responsible for the poisonings. However, this was not the last time that Lewis would be visited by police regarding the heinous act. In the meantime, a variety of other suspects were investigated. One of these suspects was a dock worker named Roger Arnold. After a divorce, Roger seemed to have become unhinged. In bars, he told people how he wanted to use poison on people, and he possessed a book that gave instructions on making cyanide. Police interviewed Roger several times and searched his house where they found the book, but never had enough to charge him. The police originally heard about Arnold from the owner of a bar where he drank, and somehow he found out who had spoken to police. Months later, he mistook a stranger for the bar owner and shot him dead. He would be convicted in January of 1984 and sentenced to 30 years. Roger passed away as a free man in 2008. In 2010, his body was exhumed so his DNA could be compared with that found on the Tylenol bottles, but it did not come back as a match. The 2010 testing of Arnold's DNA was part of a renewed effort to solve the crimes. In 2007, police had re-examined the envelope that Lewis had sent his extortion letter in. They noticed details that had escaped their notice the first time, such as the postmark which brought Lewis's timeline into question. Documents also came to light from the first investigation, showing that police had been certain that Lewis was the poisoner, but lacked enough evidence to charge him. In 2010, both Lewis and his wife were ordered to give fingerprint and DNA samples to police to compare with that found on the Tylenol bottles, but neither came back as a match. The renewed investigation into the crimes was not over yet, as in 2011, they looked into yet another possibility. In May of that year, the FBI requested a DNA sample from the infamous Unabomber. He took it as an opportunity to make an unknown request of the FBI. Ted Kaczynski wrote the FBI letter from his cell in the federal Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado in response to the request. It said that he would agree to voluntarily provide the sample, quote, if the FBI would satisfy a certain condition that is not relevant here. No one knows what the condition was or whether the FBI had acceded to it, but there were no charges brought against Kaczynski. In 2020, they contacted the daughter of Laura Morgan, who had purchased poison Tylenol but had not taken any of it. DNA swabs were obtained from the Morgan's daughter, Linda, and a sample was also taken from her deceased father's pipe. Due to the ongoing investigation, investigators would not say specifically why they waited until 2020 to get these samples. It is possible that they were running out of strings to pull and wondered if perhaps the judge was their culprit. They could have also been closing in on a particular set of prints and DNA from one of the tainted bottles and wanted to confirm whether or not it was from one of the Morgans or if it was the unknown poisoner. The poisonings are still considered unsolved to this day. Several copycats were inspired, leading to a number of arrests and fatalities, but none had the impact of the Tylenol poisonings in Chicago. Tylenol itself redesigned their packaging so that pills would be triple sealed, and any tampering would be evident. This added security, along with heavy promotions, led Tylenol to quickly regain its place as the #1 pain reliever in America.